And as I've explained in the video interview, the banned one that's circulating like crazy now around the world, um, they're not testing for coronavirus because it doesn't exist. They're testing for genetic material, which many vast numbers of people have in their body as a matter of course. Nothing to do with being ill. And so they're testing positive. And when they test positive for coronavirus, even if they're a late stage cancer or heart attack or whatever, they will be put down as having died from coronavirus. And they're even changing the figures now. And for the first time, and only in relation to coronavirus, they're now saying to people, the death certificate people, it's okay to put on the death certificate that people died from flu, pneumonia, and COVID-19. And so both causes go on different on the death certificates and go down as a death from COVID-19. And they're doing this with people they've not even tested. It's such a scam. It's unbelievable. So, we had someone in Britain die in the last few days called Eddie Large. He's a comedian, famous comedian at one point, but disappeared from view for a long time. And he's had serious heart problems. And he went in hospital with heart failure. And they tested him like tested everyone else. And they found he tested positive for COVID-19. Well, no, he didn't. He tested positive for this genetic material, which, if you amplify it enough, I explain what I mean by that in the video interview, then if you amplify it enough, everyone will test positive. Not for the virus, but it doesn't exist, but for the genetic material. And so they tested him, Eddie Large, and he tested positive for coronavirus. So when he died of heart failure, they said that he died after testing positive for coronavirus. And he went on statistics as a coronavirus death, when it's absolutely nothing to do with it. It can't be. It don't exist in that COVID-19 form. Coronavirus is, of course, everyone's got them. But it never causes a problem, except rarely, because the immune system sorts it. So it says here, essentially, and this is the same everywhere, essentially, Italy's death registration process does not differentiate between those who simply have the virus in their body, I say they don't because it doesn't exist, and those who are actually killed by it, which is actually nobody because it doesn't exist. Given the amount of fear and panic Italy's comparatively alarming numbers caused around the world, you would think other nations would be eager to avoid the same mistakes. Surely all the other countries of the world are employing rigorous standards for delineating who has and has not fallen victim to the pandemic, right? Wrong, says the article, and wrong because it's being centrally cult orchestrated globally. So everyone is playing the same scam. And that doesn't mean, you see, that all the people in the health arena are in on the scam. No, of course not. What happens is those on high say to the medical professionals, nurses, doctors, this is what you must do in relation to COVID-19. This is what you must put on the death certificate. If people test positive for the genetic material, not the virus, then you must put COVID-19 on the death certificate. And what do the medical professionals do? They do what they're bloody told. This is how it works. Some of them have broken ranks and pointed this out. Most of them are thinking, well, hold on a minute. It's economic Armageddon out there. And if I don't do as I'm told, then I'm going to lose my job. And if I lose my job, how am I going to earn a living? This is how it works. In fact, says the article, rather than learning from Italy's example, it's centrally controlled and dictated, so they're not going to learn from it. That's not the idea. Other countries not only are repeating these mistakes, but going even further. In Germany, for example, though overall deaths and case fertility ratios are far lower than Italy's, their public health agency is still engaging in a similar practice. On March the 20th, the president of Germany's Robert Koch Institute, I'm going to come to him in a second, confirmed that Germany counts any deceased person who was infected with coronavirus as a coronavirus death, whether or not it actually caused the death. And the same's happening in Britain. It will be happening in America. And how ironic that this was said by the president of Germany's Robert Koch Institute, because Robert Koch was the man, he was a bacteriologist and physician, who in 1890 developed a criteria for confirming that an infectious agent was indeed causing the disease you claim it was. These became known as the Koch postulates. One, the person, all people with this disease you are saying this agent is causing must have the same symptoms. You must isolate what you say is causing the disease from all other genetic material so that you only have what they call purification, only have what you say is causing the disease. You then, postulate number 3, inject what you say is the cause into a living host, and they must get the disease. And then you must be able to take material from the living host and inject that into someone else or some other living host, and they must get the disease. And then you can say, yes, this causes that effect. Not one single one of those Koch postulates, which have been the Bible, if you like, of confirming cause and effect in these cases, in the mainstream of medicine ever since Koch came up with them. Not one of them was carried out in the case of what is alleged wrongly to be Covid-19. So Dr. Shukarat Bhakti, quoted him before, he's a leading virologist in Germany. He calls the vital distinction between infection and disease, leading to stories such as this shared by Hedrick Streeck. In Heinsberg, for example, a 78-year-old man with previous illness died of heart failure. We're in Eddie Large territory again. And that was without SARS-2 lung involvement. Since he was infected, i.e., he tested positive for this genetic material, not a virus, he naturally appears in the Covid-19 statistics. How many Covid-19 deaths in Germany fall into this bracket? We don't know, and likely never will. And in the United States, a briefing note from the CDC, which is like the World Health Organization, basically run by Bill Gates. In a briefing note from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, National Vital Statistics Service, reads as follows. It is important to emphasize that coronavirus disease 19 or COVID-19 should be reported for all decedents where the disease caused or is presumed to have caused or contributed to death. And this is where the figures are coming from. There is no virus. As this article said, presumed to have caused, contributed, That's incredibly soft language, which could easily lead to over-reporting. Exactly, that's what it's meant to do. The reference guidance, detailed guidance, was released on April the 3rd and is no better. In cases where a definite diagnosis of COVID-19 cannot be made, but is suspected or likely, i.e. the circumstances are compelling within a reasonable degree of certainty, which means they have the symptoms of COVID-19 or have tested positive for COVID-19. That's it. And the symptoms are flu-like, which have enormous numbers of potential causes. It is acceptable in those circumstances to report COVID-19 on a death certificate as probable or presumed. In these cases, certifiers should use their best clinical judgment in determining if a COVID-19 infection was likely. And the article asks, are careful records being kept to separate COVID-19 from presumed COVID-19? Of course not. Are the media making sure they respect the distinction in their reporting? Absolutely not. Whenever the alleged casualties are referenced, we are fed one large, all-inclusive number without context or explanation, which, thanks to lax reporting guidelines, could be entirely false. They are. Government agencies all across the UK are doing the same. Northern Ireland's Public Health Agency is releasing weekly surveillance bulletins on the pandemic. In those reports, they defined a COVID death as following. Individuals who have died within 28 days of first positive result, whether or not COVID-19 was the cause of death. The National Health Service, and I'm talking about Britain here and Ireland, but this is happening all over the world. National Health Service England's Office of National Statistics releases weekly reports on nationwide mortality. In its latest reports, released on March 31st and made special mention of COVID-19, explaining that they were going to change the way they report the numbers in future. The Office of National Statistics system is predicated on the registration of deaths, meaning they count not the number of people who died every week, but the number of deaths registered per week. This naturally leads to slight delays in the recording of numbers, as the registration process can take a few days. However, with coronavirus deaths, since it's a national emergency, they are now including provisional figures, which will be included in the database in subsequent weeks. This leaves them wide open to either accidentally or deliberately reporting the same deaths twice. Once provisionally and then once officially a week later. It's extraordinary what's going on. And where's the media? Oh, that David Icke, he says there's a link between... Oh, my God. And we have this epidemiologist called Tom Jefferson. He's come out and said actually 4/5 of cases, going on China figures, don't have any symptoms. So he asked the question, what the hell are we locking down for? The answer, because it's a scam, to allow a few psychopaths to take control of human society. That's it. So, looking at, again, these national statistical office, they have said a death can be registered with both COVID-19 and influenza or pneumonia mentioned on the death certificate. Therefore, a death can be counted in both categories. So, therefore, you're doubling the numbers, right? And when they were asked, is this what you normally do? They replied, this is not something that would have always been the case, as it's just for the COVID-19 reporting. Oh, dear, it's just extraordinary. And then, just the final thing on the figures, there's some charts that are on davidicke.com. You can see them if you put in a headline into the search engine, COVID-19 in proportion. And they show the same story. But what's interesting is that what has happened is as the number, this is a chart I'm looking at now, as the number of COVID-19 registered deaths has increased, the number of people dying compared with other years from other fatal situations and diseases have plummeted. And the reason they've plummeted is because what they've died of is replaced by a diagnosis of COVID-19. Oh my God. The bigger the lie, the more we'll believe it. And here you have a German virologist who's come out. He's a virologist that's actually involved in the German response to the so-called outbreak in Germany. And this is the headline in the British Daily Telegraph. No proof coronavirus can be spread while shopping, says leading German virologist. Can't be spread while shopping, but people are queuing down the street, standing in line down the street, 6 feet apart, on a one in, one out basis to actually get into a shop. I mean, it is, I mean, you know, I walk around. I say to people all the time when I see them, I said, you know, I've just entered, I hope briefly, Alice in Wonderland, and then I'm going home. Because it is Alice in Wonderland. The Mad Hatter's in charge, right? So you see police officers walking down the street, inches from each other, not a problem. And everyone else that's part of the system, part of the imposition. And you go into a little shop, and there's like orange tape on the floor all over the place to make sure everyone stays 6 foot away from each other. And I bought something in a shop the other day, one of these little shops. And my foot was front of my foot was about 3 inches. I've got big feet. Was about 3 inches over this line. And the guy said, sorry, sir, could you step back? You're over the line. And I said, well, I want to thank you, I said, because, you know, basically you might have just saved my life, because that 3 inches will make all the frickin' difference, mate, won't it? And he said, well, that's what we're told to do. Exactly. That's why humanity is controlled by a few people. It's unbelievable. People walking up and down the street with their faces covered in masks and what have you, which can actually be counterproductive, never mind next to useless. But who knows? You're told a mask will help you. Well, I see other people wearing masks, so I'm going to put a mask on. So this is what this guy, Professor Hendrik Streeck, said, who I quoted a few minutes ago as well. Coronavirus has not been spread by shopping or going to the hairdresser. I mean, we're going to look like cavemen, you know. You haven't got someone with you, and I haven't, that can cut your bloody hair. A leading virologist has said after studying a hotspot for the virus. Streeck, leading the response in one of Germany's worst hit regions, said COVID-19 might not be spread as easily as people believe. You don't say. You know, this virus that doesn't exist, yeah, it can't be spread as easily as people thought. Oh, God. Anyway. But it came as Boris Johnson, who's in hospital with something, it's not COVID-19, but he's in hospital with something, and that's another story, warned that lockdown measures in the UK may have to be tightened, and it's signs they were beginning to meet resistance. What they want, you don't want to put the army on the streets. That's what they want to do. I live on the Isle of Wight in an island just off the south coast of England, and the army are already here um, in response to this hoax. Anyway, um, experts warned the government it needed to have the public's trust to persuade people to follow the measures. Yeah, because it's lying to us. So, of course, trust is disappearing. That's why they're trying to censor everything that anyone says that undermines the trust and exposes the lies. In his research, Professor Streak said the home of an infected family his team visited did not have any live virus on any surface, including on phones, doorknobs, or even pets' cat fur. Why don't they bloody catch it then? He told German TV there are no proven infections while shopping or at the hairdresser. And that he said this, wait for this, we know it's not a smear infection that is transmitted by touching objects, but that he's saying that the only way you can catch it, I say you can't, but this is what he's saying, is by close contact. In what he's describing is very close contact. So, in response to that, Professor John Newton, Director of Public Health Improvement for Public Health in England, another dark suit repeater, insisted lockdown was still required and should continue really as long as the scientific evidence suggested that it was the right thing. And of course, Professor John Newton, as a Director of Public Health with Public Health England, is not being affected at all by this lockdown. He's still getting his money and going where he likes because he's an essential, God help us, an essential worker.